The first week of July was a particularly harrowing time for the greater Boston Jewish community. With the stabbing of Rabbi Shlomo Naginsky outside of the Brighton Day School where he teaches, the destructive presence of anti-Semitism in American life struck too close to home. This violent event came on the heels of disturbing news coming out of the town of Duxbury, Massachusetts, the month before, as news spread of the Duxbury High football team's use of anti-Semitic language and Holocaust references as part of their play calling on the football field. Obviously, that list is far from exhaustive, and these events are not equally heinous, but I bring them up together to highlight both the severity and the breadth of the plague of anti-Semitism that the American Jewish community is facing. Everything from overt violence to microaggressions among youth. According to the Anti-Defamation League's most recent audit of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, in 2020, there were more than 2,100 acts of assault, vandalism, and harassment, an increase of 12% over the previous year. With the surge in anti-Semitic propaganda and messaging in relation to the recent violence between Israelis and Palestinians, those numbers will almost certainly be on the rise again in 2021. The American Jewish community is unfortunately caught between a rock and a hard place. We are villainized and threatened by extremist voices on the far right who spew unfounded hate, and we are targeted by the far left, mostly for our support of and allegiance to the State of Israel. At a time when the Jewish community is faced with the challenge of continuing to effectively honor, remember, and learn from the tragedy of the Shoah, now that most of the survivors and firsthand witnesses have passed away, we instead face the co-opting of this painful history by those looking to make a point about vaccine or mask mandates. I know that's a bleak picture, and it's certainly not the uplifting Rosh Hashanah message I want to be focusing on. It is also, unfortunately, the reality we are faced with, and an important one to acknowledge and confront. In the times of the Mishnah, the ancient rabbinic law code compiled around the year 200 CE, it teaches us that if a person expresses a desire to convert to Judaism, the Jewish community responds by saying, "Do you not know that Israel at the present time is persecuted and oppressed, despised, harassed, and overcome by afflictions?" We have never shied away from confronting external threats or making sure we are prepared to overcome them. The current state of anti-Semitism in America is no different. We cannot pretend it doesn't exist. We can, however, recognize the power that we, as the American Jewish community, and even the greater Newburyport Jewish community, hold. I want to pass on 3 ideas or courses of action to build our resilience and to combat the threats we face, inspired by the words of a great Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Some of you may recognize these words from adult ed. You should never fall into despair. If you believe it is possible to destroy, then believe it is possible to repair. We can and need to cultivate our personal connections to Judaism. Deborah Lipstadt, President Biden's recently appointed special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, laments that for some Jews, the fight against anti-Semitism becomes the sum total of their Jewish identity. We embed within our children a total intolerance of anti-Semitism without educating them about Jewish traditions and culture. It leaves many Jews, including the next generation, aware of what to be against, but not what to be for. We can't control how others perceive our Jewish identity, whether we are identified by a Jewish-sounding last name or by our affiliation with an institution like a synagogue. But we can control how we perceive our own Jewish identities. Every one of you here this morning has a reason for being here. The more readily we identify and cultivate why our Judaism is important to us, what makes us proud to be Jewish, the more resilient we will prove to be in the face of hate. If Professor Lipstadt were to ask you this morning, why is your Judaism important to you, would you be able to answer her? Mac asked me that question 7 years ago, and after initially feeling stumped, I got involved with this wonderful community and rediscovered the learning, the camaraderie, and the meaning that Judaism infuses into my life. And there's nothing anyone could say or do that would make me question that meaning or prevent me from doing my utmost to protect that source of light in my life. This past summer, when I was working at Beverly Hospital doing my chaplaincy internship, I visited a patient who had requested a chaplain visit. She turned out to be a particularly passionate evangelical Christian. She asked me if I had let Jesus into my heart, and I explained to her that I was Jewish and that Jesus was not part of my belief system. She did not like that. Her response was to shut me down, saying that my beliefs weren't valid and asking me to leave. I unpacked the incident later on with my supervisor, Cheryl. She was concerned that I was upset. I was, because I was sad for that patient. However, as I told Cheryl, my own convictions in my beliefs couldn't be shaken by someone else's closed-mindedness. And I was very grateful that I had spent the time building and strengthening those convictions. I was also grateful on that day for Cheryl's support, as well as the support of my 3 fellow interns who were Christians. Which brings me to my second point about how we can strengthen ourselves, by cultivating community relationships. One of the low points in my 2 years here occurred toward the end of 2019. Rabbi Ben had left me a list of community contacts to reach out to and get in touch with as I transitioned into my new role here at CAA. I had reached out to some, but not all of them. There was a lot going on in those first few months on the job, including high holidays, and I was still dealing with some degree of imposter syndrome in the new job and as a new student. However, after racist and anti-Semitic graffiti was found in a Newburyport High School bathroom, I found myself needing to build those relationships amidst very difficult circumstances, as I contacted the school, the district administration, and the mayor's office. Going into someone's office and telling them, "Hi, I'm Alex. You don't know me, but there's behavior going on in your organization that is unacceptable. Trust me, that feels terrible." Had I already worked to establish those relationships with community leaders, I would have been on much more solid footing in my time of need, and likely would have had a much easier time working with them on a response. The best way to ensure that we are supported is to support others, to show up for interfaith services, events sponsored by our local diversity, equity, and inclusion committees, or the local human rights commissions, and coming to rallies and vigils and community conversations. The most common reference point the greater Newburyport community has for CAA is the vigil that was held after the shooting in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And while we should be proud of our response to that tragic event and comforted by the community's support, our historic synagogue, the building and the people should first and foremost be a source of pride, celebration, and collaboration. The third thing we must do to ensure we can rise above threats we face is, before we turn to anyone else, we need to stand together and support one another. There is a famous saying in the Talmud, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, which translates simply to all of Israel are responsible for one another. On a global scale, the Jews are a small but mighty people that have persisted for thousands of years. In the greater Newburyport area, we are likewise a small but mighty community that has persisted for 125 years. That's a tremendous amount of history and fellowship at our backs. We need to be able to come together to offer each other support, comfort, and reassurance in an increasingly scary world. There is a Newburyport police officer outside of our door today. I wish he didn't need to be there, but I think most of us at this point agree it's for the best. And while that officer represents an external resource we can tap into to help protect ourselves from external threats, much more importantly, all of you inside this building today, whether in person or inside this building through the magic of the internet, are the most important resource we have as we come together as one to build our own inner strength and resilience heading into the new year. Shana Tova.